We make dental billing and insurance easier to understand. Subscribe to stay updated and help us grow the channel.
The next situation is, of course, the hardest to deal with. And I don't wish this on anyone, obviously. And I hope that you'll never go through this. I hope that your whole career, you will never have to go through this, because it is heartbreaking and it's tough. And I have worked with quite a few friends of mine, actually. They always become friends because this is so emotional through this process. And that is when something unexpected happens to the doctor. Okay. And in a larger clinic with multiple doctors, obviously there's a lot more. You can mitigate a lot of that. Schedules can be shifted. Let's just talk about what you would do in any situation, whether it's multiple doctors or not. One thing that you would have to remember is that it's going to be devastating and not everybody handles it the same way. I would absolutely close the office for a day, 2, 3, just to let things happen. And when I say happen, I'll go through that in a second. But you don't want to close the office for too long. And there's some reasons for that. So let's put a pin in that for a second. Okay, say you close the office for a week. Let's just say a week. What has to happen there? And I'm really talking about your emotional well-being and your team. Many of your team members are going to mourn, but if you've ever lost somebody near and dear to you, you know that the first period of time after that happens is very emotional and very raw. Then you kind of get back into the paces of regular life, right? For as a manager, you're going to have a whole different way of doing things. We'll talk about it in a second. But real grief hits you out of nowhere. And it could be 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, and your hygienist just has one of those days. Your insurance coordinator is reminded of something, a joke that happened with a claim with a patient that used to drive the doctor crazy, and the grief then will resurface. So I believe, and I'm not going to say it's a must, but I strongly believe that the office should invest in some sort of grief counseling. And I know offices that have done it as a group, and I think that's a good surface meeting. And then, of course, they know that there's somebody, the therapist information is there. But I do find it best if you are letting people have access to 1 or 2 sessions should they need it. And as the manager, I would encourage them to discuss it. And what was interesting to me, I worked with one team, and the person who needed the most help was somebody that we didn't even realize they liked the doctor. This was somebody who came in, did their job. Really, nobody knew who they were close to, but this employee had such a deep respect for the doctor. The doctor had really helped her in her career, and she just wasn't a warm and fuzzy person, right? So it was kind of hard to gauge that. And they really had no tons of interaction, right? It was we just thought she was the typical consistently showing up, fantastic assistant. And it turned out that she really had a hard time struggling with it, and it hit her. I think part of it was that she didn't understand why this was hitting her so hard. And what it was a sense of normalcy, which, even if you don't like someone, when they're in your life all the time and then they're gone, that sense of normalcy has been disrupted. But in most cases, you will also be dealing with extreme grief because this is somebody that everybody liked or respected. In some situations I've dealt with, it has actually been the spouse who worked in the office that has had to be the manager during all of this. And that's a whole different level of grief layered on top of a manager's grief. As long as I've worked with my doctor, I would be a wreck if something happened, but I can't imagine what it would be like for the wife having to deal with not just the business, but the whole aspect of personal life and all of it. So if you are in a multi-location or multi-doctor, not necessarily multi-location, but multi-doctor clinic, it is a lot easier to move past this piece because you'll be able to lean on each other, change the schedule around. And as a manager, what I would make sure you focus on is getting in touch with the patients, letting them know, really just listening to them. You'll get a lot of questions about the service and about what they can do. So if your doctor's family believed in a charity or anything like that, you want to have all of that information up towards the front so that we can distribute that as people call. If the family decides on a private ceremony, a celebration of life, then you're going to have to work on making sure that the patients are like, I know that he would be so touched to have you attend. However, the family has chosen to make this a private ceremony. And usually I can't imagine anybody would push back on that. My goodness. So let's move into the smaller practice where it's maybe one or two doctors, and now the other doctor has to pick up the pace and seeing double the patients. That cannot continue, right? So I do want you to talk about this ahead of time, because you as the manager, if this doctor is not a partner and it's an associate, you need to know in the contract what is going on with that. Is there an opportunity for the associate to have first right of refusal in order to buy the practice? So that sometimes is in the contract, sometimes it's not. You actually have to offer the practice to the associate. That'll be really outlined in the contract. That succession plan will be outlined. Or does the associate have no say? Say you sell it to another doctor and the associate now is an employee of that doctor. So you would need to know what the associate's contract calls for so that you can have that conversation there. What I will tell you is you will be making a lot of the business decisions. What I have found is unless the spouse is actually working in the office, the spouse is very much hands off when it comes to the finances and paying the bills and all of that. Well, guess what? Somebody has to continue to pay invoices. Someone has to continue to pay the health insurance bill so that people can continue to be insured. You still need to make a lot of decisions as the now de facto owner of the practice, acting owner of the practice. You should know, and this is what you want to talk about ahead of time, you should know who your accountant is, who the top 3 dentists would be that you could call and come to help out. You should know who your doctor doesn't absolutely never wants to come and help out. You probably already know that, but you want to make sure that that's a conversation. You should also find out how you're going to deal with any vendors as far as any outstanding invoices that happen. So I'll give you an example. Typically, it's not a problem to continue paying for the software. Say you have a subscription service to Acme Messaging, right? Well, unless you tell Acme Messaging, everything is fine. But you may be thinking, I want to conserve cash right now. Cash flow is more important. He's been wanting to cancel that anyways. If you were to call and mention the death of the doctor, would you be able to get that going? Well, you now have to take the time to call. And we all know it's almost impossible sometimes to cancel subscription services. But this is one area where I would hope that they would have a little grace and you'd be able to do that. There may be unfortunate situations where you find out that the practice is not in as good of health as you thought it was. That actually, it's a good time to find that out before this so that your doctor can say, honestly, I don't have 2 months operating capital. I have 1 month. So I have enough to pay you. You might need to let all the assistants and admin go and maybe rehire them. But right now I don't have enough money to pay everybody. And this happens, right? Hopefully insurance comes through. I've been in situations where one of the colleagues of the dentist actually floated a loan to the spouse so that they could do that. In another situation, the parent of the deceased dentist stepped in and helped take care of money for a little bit. But this is all information you need to know because you are going to be at the office. You're going to be grieving and you're going to need to make a million phone calls. And I can't even touch on all of them in a podcast episode. Weird things are going to come up that your doctor didn't think was weird because he or she dealt with it all the time. And you're going to be like, what? That's never even crossed my mind. So this is very hard stuff to talk about with a dentist. And if you say, hey, we got to talk about what happens if, you're not here anymore, I understand that it's a serious topic. And if they shy away from it the first time, don't give up, maybe go back another month or so. And really what you're saying to them is, I'm very concerned about the practice. If something were to happen, I just want to be in a good situation. And I would also bring in, not you in a good situation, the practice in a good situation. I would also bring in the point that if the office closes for an extended period of time without colleagues coming in to help, many of the valuation companies will tell you that the value of a practice drops dramatically in the first 6 months if the revenue is not able to pick up. So here, or to continue, so losing a hygienist is going to hurt the value of the practice. Not being able to see your patients is going to hurt. And what I say to doctors to kind of get over this hesitancy that they have is, you worked really hard to build this practice up to make it very valuable. Imagine if you go and then within 3 months, so much of the value of the practice has disappeared. Let's have this conversation. It'll be uncomfortable, but I'd rather do that than to have to, walk around and try to help. And then if try to help blindfolded, really. And if the spouse, bring them into it if they want to be. Maybe your doctor doesn't want that to be in there, but all of the dental spouses I've worked with, and I've worked with a ton, they have always wanted to know the what if and what do I do. It's not something they want to think about, but much of what we have to deal with in life is like that, right? Nobody wants to think about this. So I urge you to go into it with grace, but also being firm. What are you going to do in the event of this, through your grief and trying to manage a group of people where their whole world has changed as well?
If you learned something new today, subscribing is the best way to support the channel and keep learning with us.
Would you like to hear more? Follow the link for the full episode.